This is a Window News special report. CNN Center was raided not a while ago. Georgia is still full of protesters and people are throwing objects. We now have the video of what happened.
We're here inside CNN Center. We're just in the last 10 minutes. Demonstrators have started to come up and down this thoroughfare of Marietta and break out windows of CNN Center. It was just a short time ago that they started shooting what appeared to be BBs at us. I was struck with a BB pellet. It's unreal to witness here, Chris. This police line, we just saw an officer extracted. An officer was down. We don't know exactly how they were injured. Another officer here that was standing on these steps took some glass in the arm. These demonstrators are ready to confront these law enforcement officers. You have law enforcement in heavy tactical gear, protesters that are clearly ready. You just see something else happen there. Another demonstrator threw what appeared to be a large object at one of those SWAT officers. They're throwing signs at the police officers, and they're not showing any sign of dispersing. And about 15 minutes ago, they gave an order from the armored vehicles that had shown up here just outside. Those images, I'm not sure if you're looking at them. They gave the demonstrators an order to disperse. It was then show up in tactical gear, tear gas masks. And that's when we heard over the radio that this was happening. They've broken out the windows here and are continuing to throw objects. There's just another projectile fired. Appear to be a full water bottle. But there are officers that we can report. At least 2 officers have been injured. One of them, it appeared to be seriously injured. He was being dragged out. You could see what's left behind of this glass, the glass partition that separates the street. These demonstrators are now launching something that appears to be some sort of smoke grenade that they're throwing inside CNN Center right now. They're kicking it back out, guys. This is live happening in front of your eyes. They've just thrown, I think, Powerade or some sort of Gatorade or liquid, guys, on the officers. These officers are being confronted. And these demonstrators, they know what's on the other side of this. They've been warned. These officers have already fired or deployed tear gas into the crowd. We saw another with a long gun fire what appeared to be a rubber bullet at another demonstrator who had thrown a large object. You see these demonstrators are walking inside CNN Center at this point. It seems as though this man might be detained. He's being detained. Let's see if we can talk to him. Another rock just thrown there at police. We're right behind the police line. These are very large objects. Police being hit. This demonstrator, let's see if we could ask him why he was here, guys. Hey, why did you show up here today? Why are you here? Why did you come here? What made you show up?
They need to be changed. Here in our country, it's not black, white. Officers need to be trained better.
You took me off the air?
No, Nick, you're still there. You okay?
Hey, yeah, okay, yeah, sorry. I didn't know if I was taken off the air. This is a live acted situation.
What did he say? I couldn't hear all of it.
You guys heard that there. I was trying to get an interview with the demonstrator. He said he wanted to, police can do better. Police can do better. I'm here for change. We've heard the chants of no justice, no peace. Another large object just thrown there at CNN. This is our home, Chris, This is where we come to work every day. Journalists who are trying to tell the truth, trying to deliver information. It's one of the noble parts about society, and these demonstrators have decided to come here today to take out their frustration and their anger, not just on the police, but it seems on our CNN Center as well. These police officers now are advancing. They're grouped together as those objects continue to fly, being blocked by SWAT team shields. There appears to be one person in front of the demonstrators, Chris. I don't know if you can make him out on camera. He's got a white bandana on with his shirt off. He's trying to keep his crowd back and to try. It appears as though this is happening right live in front of us, that they're understanding the gravity of the situation here and what might escalate next.
So, Nick,
as this is happening, you're seeing just next to us, Chris, they're taking objects out of McCormick and Smicks to try to remove large objects away from the demonstrators. Right. Go ahead, Chris.
Nick, are the cops that are inside the CNN Center the only cops that are there, or are there more cops on the backside of this crowd?
We're giving you a different vantage point, a different perspective. There's a larger police presence, but what has happened here in the last 20 minutes is as the demonstrators were pushed out in front of the big red letters that they're in front of CNN Center, pushed into the main intersection, they started to move, sort of down more towards, more towards Centennial Olympic Park. And they took advantage of police not being in this area. They started to throw rocks at these windows. And it was just before we joined you live on air that this situation unfolded. It is unreal to see this. I know I keep using that word, but you never think something like this is going to happen here. Atlanta has been historically a city that, has held demonstrations, even during the rash of police shooting of African-American men in 2015. This was a city that held large demonstrations, but they were by and large peaceful. This is nothing but.
Now, how long has this been going on, Nick?
They've been here since 3 o'clock this afternoon. We understand it was, a smaller crowd which gathered this afternoon. And it was about 7 o'clock that we started to get alerts from our national desk that they were throwing projectiles out in front of CNN Center, doing graffiti. We showed up about a half hour later, and within minutes, things took a turn. Here comes another object being thrown by a demonstrator in a mask. Now more reinforcements being brought in, coming behind our photographer, William Walker. What's going on, Kevin?
So what they're doing is...
They're calling for more shields, guys. Things are getting really bad out here, Chris.
Nick, what they're going to do is they're going to create what they call a phalanx, okay? They're going to create an angle of these shields. And what they're going to then have to make a decision to do is to either hold, which is they expect these windows to be broken and people to advance. And this is going to be the line that the officers draw, that you will not come any further than this. The decision that's more complicated for them is whether or not to move forward, because they only have where this white guy with the skateboard is standing. That's the only way out of the building for them. And they will not fit through there.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is a very dangerous thing to do. So they are doing a stand and hold right now. What are you hearing?
Well, it's pretty clear that these officers are nervous. They're seeing this situation de-escalate. They're trying to, as you say, hold this line here. And to the credit of the police officers so far, we have seen them not use much force while they've been having these large objects thrown at them. They are establishing their presence right now. There's no doubt about that, holding this line here, Chris. And, we're watching it happen right in front of us.
Well, they are preparing for what they anticipate to be a rush of the building.
Red beams putting on this individual here in front of you, and the man with the skateboard. You've got, weapons pointed at him. This is just so sad to see happen here.
Now, that's what the umbrella is about, is to try to block the officer's vision of what's going on. The question becomes, once this guy with the skateboard succeeds and breaks the window, what does it mean to the crowd? Is that the satisfaction they want, or are they going to try to advance? And God forbid they do, you're going to have a very different situation.
Well, we'll be live right here covering it all, Chris. We're right behind the police line. The officers are outnumbered. Those demonstrators are going back, they're very deep, going back towards Centennial Olympic Park. I feel as though I believe I just heard what I thought was a taser deployed. I don't see anyone, though, that was on the other end of it. You're seeing more shields, more reinforcements come into that line. Police officers telling their colleagues, directing them to where they need more reinforcement. We're seeing now more demonstrators come to the front. They seem like they're antsy, Chris. They seem like they're ready to charge. This is not a good look. This is not a good sign here for these officers on the other side of it. And certainly not for the demonstrators who are coming towards us.
All right, so Nick, let's just go through this one step at a time. First, you and the team have a secondary location for you? If they come through here and the police start going, you have a way to get up the stairs?
We absolutely do. We've managed to put ourselves in a position where, our viewers can see what's going on, though, we know safety, and there's no story worth risking your life over, Chris. We know that. I've got a daughter and a wife I want to get home to tonight.
You got a beautiful family. I see them all the time. You're a lucky man. You just make sure that the team has a place to go. You can always report later. And again, this is a tough situation because you have a small opening. And if they break the other window, then you have a bigger opening for the protesters to come in, although that would be a really, really dangerous thing for them to do. And then you also have another option for the officers to try to move the line farther outside CNN. The big question becomes, Nick, do we have any way of knowing what's happening with that crowd outside in terms of policing? Or is this it? Just these cops here? You said there's a larger police presence. Where?
There is a larger police presence, just east of me here, Chris. You have the majority of those officers here. That's where the reinforcements are coming from. The crowd is, we hate to give these estimates because we haven't talked to police, but there was over 1,000 people here, perhaps even closer to 2,000 people here. Officers outnumbered. They did bring in those reinforcements, the SWAT team, members of the bomb squad, state patrol, local police officers, plainclothes. They've given these orders already to these demonstrators to disperse. They were starting to gear up with tear gas masks, ready to deploy tear gas, when all of a sudden these windows started breaking, and those projectiles continue to fly in the direction of the police, Chris. There's another one. Wow. Gosh.
So, and just so people understand what's going on, this is a big building, and this is an expansive lobby area. You are not in the newsroom. This is the front of a big
Chris,
corporate complex.
This used to be the world's largest indoor amusement park, the wacky world of Sid and Marty Krofft, before Ted Turner bought this and turned it into what is the Omni Center and then became CNN Center. This used to be the site of an indoor roller coaster. It still has the world's longest freestanding escalator. Thousands of CNN employees are here. It's connected to a hotel.
Wait, hold on a second, Nick.
The capacity of the hotel right now.
Nick,
go ahead.
Are those guys in front preparing to light something on fire? You see how they're wrapping his hand up right now?
It looks like it.
They're either wrapping his hand up because
Chris.
he's going to punch the glass and he wants something to protect his hand, but I saw him pouring something on it. Maybe he hurt his hand, and they're just trying to wrap his hand. Just keep an eye on that situation. Hopefully he just is taking care of a wound, so if he cut himself, he's not going to bleed too much. Good, that's what it seems to be.
Well, they've already lit things on fire so far, Chris. They lit a police car on fire at about 8 o'clock. That was just, still smoldering. They've lit signs on fire. This is a crowd that came to confront police. They're angry. And we can't underscore, on the cursory level, you see the violence that is happening and unfolding right in front of our cameras. They're here under the premise because a black man was killed by police. They want to hold police accountable. Their message, however, has taken a violent tone here. And we don't hear the mention of George Floyd's name at all. We just see the violence happening here in front of us.
Well, this is a bizarre scene for people who aren't used to this. You have some people are laughing, some people are videotaping.
They just threw something on fire, Chris, a firecracker.
Yep.
Something's on fire. Shit.
Nick, you all right?
You okay? You okay? You okay, guys? You all right? Is everyone okay? You all right, William? Okay, we're okay. Our crew's okay. They just threw a firecracker in on us. What was that?
Yeah, that was born a firecracker.
Well,
like one of those.
Was that like a
pretty powerful firecracker?
It might have been a
that just went off.
flashbang,
That got
Nick.
our heart pumping a little bit.
It might have been a flashback. They may have gotten their hands on an undetonated flashbang that the police use, which does exactly what you just saw. Everybody's okay?
Good gracious. They just put something else on fire. Everything is okay, but they've just set something else on fire outside, Chris. We don't want to get any closer than here, but can you see what's going on? You pushing on that? No, okay. These demonstrators are starting now to make their way back towards the park.
Well,
they're loading. We understand my producer, Kevin Conlon, says that they're loading tear gas canisters up right now.
But if that's tear gas that's in front of there,
our security's
Nick,
telling us to move. Chris, I gotta go.
Yeah, Nick, if that's tear gas, you're going to want to get away from it because it's going to come up the stairs fast.
We're getting out of here, Chris.
All right, get yourself to a safer location.
We're getting out of here. We'll get back to you later. You got it. Thanks, buddy.
All right. So here's what we've been watching, okay? You're actually not looking at Minneapolis. On your screen, you'll see it's Atlanta. That is the CNN World Headquarters. Police had been outside, and then as the crowds advanced on CNN, and they were on top of the CNN logo and spray painting things on it, and they started to light cars on fire and become increasingly violent, we had the police move inside CNN, and then the windows of CNN were broken. And then, so you had big point of ingress, but then you had what we were showing you for the last few minutes, a standoff where you had rows of protesters, or whatever you want to call them, demonstrators, angry, agitated individuals, up against the face of a phalanx of police inside CNN World Headquarters. Nick Valencia took cover after what appeared to be what they call a flash bang, which does what it sounds like. And now you see canisters coming, which are probably some kind of deterrent spray, either a pepper spray or tear gas. And the officers are obviously trying to clear the area in Atlanta as you watch it on your screen. Again, this is not Minneapolis. There were two sides to the police presence. There was one small group inside CNN and then a larger group down the street where there had been more violence.
Just set this on fire. That just happened. You can exactly see what that is. Looks like it may be a trash can, but just kind of that just happened not too long ago. And still behind us, there's still a lot of people just trying to run up, throw things at police officers, and they just go. They threw tear gas. I'm fine. All right, we're good. We're far. We're back. It was just tear gas. They threw a lot. They threw a lot. No, we're good. We're good. You too. The fire. They want the fire.
Black Lives Matter.
Not quite sure what that box did to the piece. I know, right?
Can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me? They just threw something on the fire. That's why everybody ran. They, okay, that's in the middle of the park. It's right by the torch. It's right by the Olympic torch. Is that the torch? Yes, that's the torch. Yeah, it's right by the torch. Or not the torch. It's right by one of the big light poles. What are these called? I think that's the information center. It's the information center. It's the welcome
Crowd
center
has kept on
for
going.
Okay, so now here, 7th and Grand, did you say?
7th and Hope,
7th
actually, is
and
where we
Hope.
are right now. Yep.
Okay, so 7th and Hope and also Pershing Square. So that would be 2 officers now who have been injured in tonight's melee.
2 officers injured, and here an example of somebody trying to hold somebody else back from, just overdoing it. It's one thing to express your frustration with these officers, but when you go too far, that's when trouble arises. So somebody clearly very angry, screaming at these officers, and others trying to diffuse the situation here. You can see, obviously, these police officers exercising a tremendous amount of restraint, as they have been for the last 48 hours, and tonight is no different. They are really doing their best to be as patient as possible with all of these protesters.
Yeah.
Well, and it's really kind of a feature of protest demonstrations like this, where they start out peacefully, but there's always a few that seem to either want to agitate or get carried away and end up damaging property or hurting people. And you see the other demonstrators frequently. We've seen a number of cases like this just in the last few days of the people who either called the demonstration or who are part of it and want no part of any sort of violence or property damage.
Yes, we've got to get going. Sorry about that.
Trying to restrain people who are intent on causing trouble. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they aren't. And it, whatever the city, we've seen it in all different cities. These demonstrations are happening literally all over the country, in Iowa, in Atlanta, in Minneapolis, obviously, Lexington, was it Lexington, Kentucky? No, Louisville, excuse me. Louisville, Kentucky, which is, of course, where one young woman was killed by police in her own apartment. These demonstrations are happening everywhere, and you're seeing people of goodwill who want to show their displeasure and their outrage at what has happened, along with people who are not necessarily of goodwill, who are fomenting trouble within the situation.
Yeah.
Air 7 having to leave the area now to get fuel.
Yeah, we've been looking at other live pictures from, you can see Minneapolis. You can see a large crowd gathering in Minneapolis right there. And again, we do know there's a curfew in place, and we do know the National Guard was called out to this area because they've been having so much unrest there the last few evenings.
Everybody's just kind of completely... All right, so people violating that curfew in Minneapolis, and I don't see National Guard troops in this shot or police, but that's an ongoing, very, very troubling situation. All right, we're going to discontinue at this point, and we will rejoin you a little bit later on, and as events warrant here in Los Angeles. We invite you to watch ABC 7 tonight at 11 o'clock, where we'll have a complete wrap-up as well as live coverage of the events that are unfolding across the country and here.
Coming up on 7th and Broadway at the corner here. which is near the police department, as you all know, the Oakland Police Department. The crowd has stopped here, and I now see police officers. They are several feet ahead here, and the crowd has officially stopped where the officers are.
Well, and Jobina, I know you said you were at 7th and Franklin. We're now getting word that police are actually shutting down the Webster on-ramp to 880 right now. And on Sky 7 right now, we're seeing some activity, perhaps. It's getting dark, so frankly, it's getting hard to tell. We see some police officers in tactical gear and some protesters farther down the street. Are you seeing any of that?
So, yes. Okay, where I am is 7th and Broadway, which is where you can see the police department, as well as for people that are familiar with downtown Oakland, where the Have a Heart dispensary is as well. And there are police officers here. People have stopped. This is kind of a lull in the moment. We'll see what happens from here. But I am not surprised that they are shutting down that off-ramp because there are hundreds of people in the street and you don't want cars coming down here. But that is, yes, I am somewhat seeing that, but the crowd is so thick, I am not able to fully get a view of those officers, but I do know that they're ahead of where I am.
Sky 7 has sort of zoomed in, Jobina, and we see about 4 officers in that off-ramp right now, sort of, as you say, making sure that cars don't come off the freeway into this crowd. And there were a few protesters who looked like they were approaching the officers. They were holding up signs and then sort of just moving back down the sidewalk. As you say, everything so far looks to be peaceful. We've got 2 people holding up a very large banner of some sort, approaching the police officers, and there's Dan, it looks like there's a couple people that are sort of starting to walk on the off-ramp or get close to the off-ramp.
Yeah, is that an off-ramp or an on-ramp we're looking at? It looks like an on-ramp to me, actually, but where the banner was.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure police want to protect both the on and off ramps. They don't want cars coming off the freeway. And then, of course, what we saw in San Jose earlier with protesters on the freeway, they might be trying to avoid that situation.
And you can see, as we can see from Sky 7, Kate, you can see a smattering of police in different locations, sort of strategically placed. We see some protesters on the run now, moving very rapidly underneath adjacent to the freeway. We don't know, obviously, where they're going or what they're up to, but they're moving very quickly at this point. You can see on the far right-hand side of your screen as they turn the corner there, directly beside the freeway, a lot of protesters moving quickly down the street.
Well, and Dan, again, it looks like some traffic got caught inadvertently in this protest. As those...
Yeah, and they seem to be, Kate, unless I'm wrong, they have been left alone. No problems for those drivers other than the inconvenience. Protesters haven't bothered them. But as anyone can understand, probably intimidating to be in your car and see a bunch of protesters around you, not sure what the intention is or how long you're going to be stuck there. But so far, no problems in that regard.
And I'm getting some new notes now that police are shutting down the Jackson Street on-ramp to 880 northbound, and that the CHP is calling in reinforcement to keep the protesters off the freeway in Oakland, which is what I suspected, since that's what we saw earlier on Highway 101 in San Jose. I'm also hearing now that they're trying to get on the 5th Street off-ramp. This is the Jackson Street exit on southbound 880. I think Jobina was having a hard time hearing with us, so she just hung up. But it was great to hear from her as she marched alongside the protesters, who she says were remaining very peaceful, just trying to make sure that their protest stayed on message. Dan, it looks like we've got protesters now on 880.
Yeah, man.
We've got people on the freeway. We've got traffic screeching to a halt. A very dangerous situation right now as people move across those lanes of the freeway. The protest obviously moved onto the freeway, which it looks like the police and CHP were trying to avoid, and now traffic is stopped.
Well, this is exactly what we saw today on southbound 101 at Alum Rock in San Jose, with one big exception, Kate, and that was it was daytime. Far more dangerous.
This just makes me so nervous seeing those people.
Far more concerning to see people do this in the middle of the night when it's dark and drivers may not see them. And you see a driver there on the right scooting through, just narrowly missing people in the street. So this is much more dangerous. It's always dangerous, but much more dangerous than we saw in 101 when it was daylight.
Right. I mean, it's dark, and you even see it's dark for our helicopter, and thank goodness those cars stopped in time, because that traffic was moving very quickly when people hopped over that divider onto the other side of the freeway. So now you can see 880 traffic is stopped completely in both directions as the protesters pour onto the freeway from the streets of downtown Oakland, Dan. Boy.
Yeah, and they have stopped traffic, and we will see when and if police decide to respond to that particular spot on 880 and how long they allow the protesters to stay there. In San Jose, it was about an hour that they shut down the southbound direction of 101. And so we will see. But at least if there's a bit of good news here, the cars are stopped. You know, the protesters are in the street and no one's likely to get hit. When they first rushed out on the street, you're right, Kate, makes you terribly nervous. You see somebody there take a moment and zip through, which is, you can understand their frustration wanting to get out of harm's way, but it's also very dangerous.
A very dangerous situation in general here right now. Unfolding as about almost an hour after this protest officially started. They gathered a group of several hundred people peacefully in front of City Hall, and then at about 8:20 they started moving through the streets. This car is just weaving through that crowd of people.
And we saw, I don't know if you saw, Kate, but somebody was trying to hit it from behind as it went by, obviously angry and agitated that they were getting through the crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw that happen in San Jose earlier when traffic was stopped on Highway 101 and someone came through with some sort of tool and smashed some of the rear windshields of cars there earlier in San Jose. We see, what does it look like? 4 cars there, 5 cars, 6, a whole line of traffic stopped on 880 right now as those protesters gather in an even larger group on now both sides of the freeway, which is what police and the CHP were trying to avoid, but they couldn't stop the crowd that pushed onto the freeway. Dan, you were watching earlier when this happened in San Jose. What ultimately took the protesters off the freeway?
You know, that was fascinating, actually, Kate, because there were several hundred protesters at the height of it on the freeway on that southbound 101 stretch of road by Alum Rock. And without real warning, and there was not a significant police presence on there at that time, about 2/3 of the group, about 200 people, left. And really was unclear what triggered them to leave, but they all sort of just left. And about 15 or 20 minutes later, the rest of them left. But we never saw police push them out of the way or confront them in any way. They may have told them that they had to move, and they did, but there was no line of police pushing them out of the way. So it's not really clear why they suddenly decided to move.
And Dan, I'm not sure that I'm seeing any police here telling the protesters to move, but they are moving across the freeway. Now it looks like they're walking down the freeway in the lanes of traffic. This is 880, both lanes, north and southbound, at Jackson Street in downtown Oakland right now. Just about 5-10 minutes ago, protesters moved off the streets of downtown Oakland onto the freeway while traffic was moving very quickly.
And now they're walking in the opposite direction on the other side of the freeway, if I'm not correct?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. We've got traffic blocked on both sides, so they're moving, you know, where the cars aren't blocking those lanes.
Oh, yeah. Now they're moving exactly right in the other direction. They have blocked the traffic and are walking down the freeway.
And this looks like a CHP unit that's pulled up. We'll have to see what they do, whether they try and just keep the crowd safe, whether they try and disperse the crowd. They're obviously moving in the opposite direction of the protesters, and someone's approaching them now. Banging on the back windshield of the police car. So you just have to hope that people stay safe in this very precarious situation. You can see the police car moving off of the freeway right now. Traffic completely stopped on 880 in both directions.
Well, and as we saw in San Jose today, with any luck, that it won't replay itself here. As time goes on, tempers flare. People in traffic get frustrated that they're sitting in traffic. Protesters get agitated. Yep. Some police do as well. And that's why you want to try to diffuse these things as quickly as you can, because the longer it goes on, the more likely it is that someone says something, throws a punch, throws a bottle, a police officer does something they shouldn't, and next thing you know, things erupt in a way that everyone hopes to avoid.
And Dan, now they're gathered, the protesters are gathered on the edge of the freeway on an overpass, it looks like, and they're holding up their signs. It looks like they might be cheering at other protesters that are on the street below them.
Yeah, that could be the case, Katie. You're right. If you look between the two roadbeds, there may be some people underneath, or they're just, yeah, there are some people. You're absolutely right. There's some people underneath that overpass there. Now, to where they may not have any idea where they're going. You know, they may not even know. Looks like people have lit some flares, some road flares, in the crowd, and you know, they may not even be aware of what their plan is. You know.
Absolutely. Again, well, you can see the crowd is moving, but they got on at Jackson Street in downtown Oakland, and you can see traffic is at least starting to move on one side, although it's moving, and it's, Dan, you know this is making me nervous. It's moving, and there's more protesters coming onto the freeway. Yeah. So you also have to wonder, are all the drivers aware of what's going on in front of them? It's not something you usually expect to see people pop up in the middle of a freeway.
No, and you're right, it is nerve-wracking, isn't it, Kate, to watch. You just hope everyone is safe. Last thing we want is anybody hurt. Oh, now somebody throwing a flare down at, looks like the police officers below. And we understand, by the way, the 12th Street BART station, BART trains are not stopping. Of course, there haven't been many people on BART trains during this shutdown, so it's not affecting a lot of BART commuters certainly at this time of day and in this time in our lives where BART has been down about 95% ridership. So the trains aren't stopping at the 12th Street station, but there are probably very few passengers on BART anyway. But you saw the flare. It looked like he threw the flare down to the next level at the police.
And then something sort of spun around, and you can see the Oakland Fire Department is arriving right now, obviously, to try and check on that and see what's going on. And then as that happened, protesters were moving back onto the other side of the freeway right there, as cars are still moving and stopping.
Mm-hmm. Some on bicycles, as you can see, some on foot.
We haven't seen, which is what we saw in San Jose earlier, besides the one protester banging on the back of the cop car, anyone, you know, approach any of these cars that are stopped in traffic.
Yeah, which is a good thing. It's a good point,
Yes.
Kate. We have not seen, and you know, one hopes that no driver shouts out anything or a protester shouts something and instigates something that ends up ending badly. But so far, they're just walking past the cars and leaving them alone, we think, although these folks are getting awfully close to this car.
Someone right there in the middle of the screen on the upper left looked like they had a flare.
Yeah, that is a road flare. Exactly right, that you keep in the back of your car in case.
And then look at this right there on the on-ramp. It's a whole line of police cars flashing their lights. And then below them, the rest of the protesters on the streets moving through traffic towards the freeway, perhaps. Hopefully they'll stay off of it for the safety of everyone.
You see an Amazon truck, very much in demand these days, the last 2 months, everybody ordering online. Those deliveries may be late.
Well, and that's what makes this whole night so incredible, is that we've all been sheltering in place. We've all been sort of in this pandemic together. And what happened in Minneapolis really set off a nationwide firestorm of anger.
And I think you and I talked about this, Kate. It's a great point. There's pent-up fear, anxiety. People have been restless. They've been cooped up for 2 months. Many have lost their jobs. There's economic stress. They haven't been able to do much. And then this incident involving George Floyd, this tragedy in Minneapolis, reignites that deep racial divide and that those feelings that have not gone away, but the last 2 months seem to have been subdued by the current crisis, and now it explodes across the country into acts of frustration and anger and disgust at a problem that America hasn't been able to shake.
Absolutely, and even though we have all been in this pandemic together, it certainly hasn't treated everyone equally. We know that minority communities have been hit particularly hard by COVID. Both the African American community and the Latino community here in the U.S. have really seen high rates, both of the virus and death rates. So,
very good point.
While we have been in this pandemic together, we haven't really all been feeling it in the same way. And then, as you say, the tragedy in Minneapolis with George Floyd just obviously hit a nerve with so many people across the country. And we're seeing that play out here in the Bay Area, but also in New York, in Washington, D.C., in Atlanta, of course, in Minneapolis. We've seen incredible protests.
I think one in Tennessee today, if I'm not mistaken, a number of different places.
Lake Street, and what you've got is a number of protesters in the hundreds that have come from the right side of your screen, and they've moved forward. What you're looking at is a shot in front of the 5th precinct. That has still got police in it. The protesters were there. They have moved beyond it and off to the right. You can't really see them now, but there are well over 1,000. Then you can see the Stop and Shop there. There's some smoke in the air, but you see the Stop and Shop. There's some smoke to the left of it, and they've broken a hole through the protesters have broken a hole through the scaffolding there and have gone inside, and they're looting that. And then if you look over, Miguel's going to pan the camera over to the right, and what you can see between us and the Office Depot side is more smoke. Something is on fire there, and there's something burning on that side. Above us is a Black Hawk helicopter that has just been circling at relatively low altitude, probably well under 1,000 feet the whole time, keeping an eye on what's going on. But that fire, that smoke is growing and billowing. It's moving over to where we are in front of us. The 5th precinct still appears to have police in it. There does not seem to be any direct confrontation between protesters and the police. The protesters have moved off and to the right. They're moving their way around the city. But what's important as you see the shot, Joy, is to understand that the curfew went into effect at 9 p.m. Eastern. At no point has there been anything that looks like a curfew in this city. There's no National Guard presence that we can see. There is no Minneapolis police presence, and there is no state police presence. This is, again, a night in which the protesters are controlling the streets, at least in some parts of Minneapolis and its suburbs, Joy.
One thing that we've seen here in Oakland, we certainly saw in San Jose, we said over the last couple of months, we're in this together. What we saw in San Jose today, and here in Oakland too, from what I've seen, a very interesting, diverse group of people taking to the streets. This is not just an African-American issue. It may affect them disproportionately, but we saw African-Americans, white people, Asian folks, Hispanic folks, young people, looked like teens, early 20s, and I saw several middle-aged folks out there in San Jose, particularly today. It was a little dark for me to identify folks more specifically in Oakland, but this evening. But we saw a mix of people demonstrating that sense that, hey, we're all in this together, and this is a problem that all of us have to solve.
Well, and that's what Dan Noyes was saying in San Jose, that it was a diverse crowd marching through the streets there. He and Alex Gray did such a fantastic job for hours taking us through, being our eyes and ears on the ground in San Jose as the crowd moved through those streets. And now here in Oakland, this protest started just over an hour ago now at 8 o'clock in front of City Hall at Frank Ogawa Plaza. And within about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, moved onto the freeway where it's been for the past 15, 20 minutes or so. Those protesters are moving closer to that Safeway Big Rig. Dan, it looks like someone's climbing on the hood of the truck. It looks like several people are up there protesting. Probably a scary moment for that truck driver, I imagine. I imagine really for all of the people in their cars who inadvertently got stuck in this protest, and I imagine very surprised to see this in front of them on the freeway.
Very surprised, and it's frightening.
Yeah.
Sure, whenever you're in a crowd of people and you're not sure what's going to happen, you feel a little helpless. The truck driver, wisely at this point, seeming to stay in the car. And of course, protesting was one thing. Vandalizing or terrorizing people or something else that people will react to. But this truck driver seems to be staying pretty calm at the moment. But, you know, this always seems to happen, doesn't it, Kate? Even, you know, rushing on the freeway, stopping traffic, that's one thing. But there always seems to be in these things that we've seen over the years, a few people that decide we're going to take it to the next level. You know, maybe a driver, somebody says something. Somehow it gets escalated. And here we see an example of people deciding, you know what, just stopping traffic isn't enough. Let's start climbing on vehicles.
Well, absolutely. And I wonder also, do they have anywhere else to go? So are they just standing on the freeway? Because now we saw that police were blocking the on-ramp. I'm not sure where these protesters move unless they go back where they came from, in the other direction where we saw those police cars. There's a group of people linking arms there.
Now, what are we, yeah.
And they're, as the police are moving onto the freeway, it looks like the protesters are linking arms and moving closer.
Are the police stopping or continuing? It's hard to say.
Well, so now we see a protester holding on to the front of a police car, an SUV, as it tries to move forward through the freeway. They're moving on, Dan.
Yeah. Maybe going to the next exit ramp.
Maybe, and I wonder if that's the protesters' intention, to stay there and just block traffic, or if they're going to move farther down the freeway. We saw them on the cabs of those two trucks a moment ago, and you can see that traffic is still blocked in both lanes. Again, this is Interstate 880 in downtown Oakland. This started at the Jackson Street on-ramp, and now protesters have moved a little bit farther down the freeway. You can see traffic still trying to move through. Dan, it looks like there's some sort of first responder vehicle right there that the crowd of protesters is crowding on the on-ramp. It looks like an ambulance. It's hard to tell. It is, of course, dark now, which is, you know, a different element to this protest than we saw earlier in Oakland. And then, of course, in San Jose, it was bright daylight.
I think you're right. It is an ambulance. And, you know, presumably, let's let that ambulance go wherever it needs to go and help whoever it's supposed to go help. A lot of people on the freeway. I mean, as you can see, and as Sky 7 pulls back, you can see the impact on traffic on 880, no surprise. You know, the freeway, even in this time period of shutdown, it's very, very crowded. Okay, and even in this period where traffic is minimal compared to what it usually is around the Bay Area, traffic backs up very quickly when the freeway is shut down. And there are several hundred people out on the freeway now. We've seen, as you saw with us, folks climbing on that semi-truck, on the cab of the semi-truck, probably 5 or 6 people. Looks like they've gotten off the car now, the truck. And let's see as we pan. Still, no police presence up there. I don't see any, from what I can tell, police presence there. But there are a great number of protesters, some on bicycles, some carrying signs, some carrying lit flares, the kind of flare you'd keep in the back of your car for a tire emergency or a breakdown of some kind. We've seen them lighting those traffic flares. And, you know, Kate, you were saying, and I agree with you completely, it makes you nervous to see people, and made me nervous watching that protester putting his hands on the brush bar of that police vehicle, standing in front of it as the officer tried to get by. You know, it takes a moment for him to trip and fall backwards and hit his head and be seriously injured, or the officer to run him over. It always makes you nervous when moving cars around groups of people like this.
Absolutely. A very dangerous situation continues here in Oakland on 880 as all these drivers became inadvertently trapped in the middle of this protest, which started off very peacefully in front of Frank Agawa Plaza. And for the most part, we haven't seen the clashes between police and these protesters that we saw in San Jose, but we also haven't seen the police officers, for example, up on the freeway, which I'm sure is a very intentional tactical response from the CHP and from OPD, who have been out on scene tonight on the streets. But so we haven't seen that clash that we saw in San Jose, but what we are seeing, of course, is these protesters getting close to these civilian cars, climbing on the cabs of these big rigs. It looks like this car right here, maybe just trying to turn around and go the wrong way down the freeway to get out of this. I'm sure there's some very nervous drivers, not quite sure what they're sort of stuck in the middle of.
Yeah, now interesting, as you said, Kate turning around and trying to go the other way, presumably.
You can see they're driving now, not sure what to do because it's wrong way on the freeway, which is
not a good idea either.
Not a good idea either.
Well, it's an intimidating and frightening situation for those drivers stuck in traffic. And as law enforcement tries to figure out how to handle this ebbing and flowing group of protesters, they're never able to predict exactly what they're going to do.
And you can see that they all just moved off of one side of the freeway. Traffic is now all of a sudden moving. Why that happened, we don't know, but it looks like the protesters are now very quickly moving off both sides of the freeway, perhaps back down onto the streets of downtown Oakland.
And you know, Kate, this is exactly what happened in San Jose. All of a sudden, sort of without warning, without reason, they left the freeway. We're going to pause here for a moment so we can bring viewers in on ABC 7. And good evening to you, Dan Ashley, along with Kate Larson, with you, continuing live coverage. We've been on our digital channel online, bringing you live coverage of the ongoing protests tonight in Oakland. There was one all day long today in San Jose. Now the streets of Oakland have seen protest, and what you're looking at live from Sky 7 are protesters who just moments ago, as we came on here, left the freeway, having blocked both lanes of traffic for some time, Kate.
Yeah, Dan, they were on 880. They moved on a large group of protesters about 8:50, about 20 or so minutes ago, and were blocking both lanes of traffic for quite a long time until 30 seconds ago. They all very quickly moved off one side of the freeway, then another, and you can see now both lanes of traffic are all of a sudden moving again. We just saw Sky 7 overhead, this intersection below the freeway, and you can see, I know it's dark, but there are still groups of protesters on the freeway. This all started at Frank Ogawa Plaza in front of City Hall. Several hundred people gathered there.